Mental Approach podcast, where we dive into all things mindfulness and mental performance as it relates to youth sports. Today, my guest is Travis Snider, and for those who may not recognize him, he was a former first-round pick of the Toronto Blue Jays in 2006 and played about 15 years in the MLB, and he's now the CEO of 3A Athletics. Welcome, Travis.
Thanks for having me, Todd.
Pleasure to have you. I think coming across what you're doing now as an individual post baseball really caught my attention as far as what this is all about. So I really appreciate you taking the time to join us.
I look forward to it.
So let me ask. I think it was probably 2023. You announced publicly that you had been diagnosed with complex post traumatic stress disorder. And I can't imagine that was very easy to come out and kind of talk about, but could you share a little around how that kind of came about and how it links to the mission you've got going on now with 3A?
Yeah, as a child, I had two loving parents, but both parents struggled with addiction and other demons that they battled throughout my childhood. They eventually separated when I was in high school. My mom had gotten very sick with a diagnosis of pneumonia that turned into a coma. And as a family, we really went through a tough time after my freshman year of playing football. We had the community support that rallied around us, which I think is kind of the overarching theme. And what I want to accomplish with 3 Athletics is really educating parents and coaches to understand, each individual kid is experiencing something different than the next kid. And for us to be able to connect with people, it's really important to get deeper into what they're dealing with mentally and emotionally. So as we were going through the high school experience, I started to progress in the baseball side of things with the draft and all the attention that I was getting from my success and achievements on the field. All the while, I was dealing with the off the field stuff with the family, going through the separation. We got evicted from our home, watched my parents in and out of rehab, and it was a really tough time for me as going through the adolescent stage of puberty and into high school. Just the social pressures that come with being good at a sport or not being good at a sport, right? And I think it's easy to use my story as an example because I had success and I achieved things, but there's a lot of kids out there that are going through similar experiences that I went through that don't have the resources, that don't have that community to rally around them. So as I went through the high school experience and ended up getting drafted, I really suppressed a lot of those things that I had experienced in my family life. Went through multiple surgeries in high school as well, which I haven't talked too much about, but 2 ankle surgeries and elbow surgery. So there's no shortage of adversity. And I think as I was able to overcome these things in my personal life, as well, as the physical surgeries that I was dealing with, I created this reputation for being well beyond my years, maturity wise, physically. I developed very early, 15 years old. I haven't grown since. So I was kind of in this position, right, where everybody looked at me as like the kid that had it figured out. And I had convinced myself on one hand that I was ready for professional baseball. I was ready for my career that was upcoming because so much momentum had carried me to that place of being a first round draft pick and eventually making my debut at 20 years old. But what I really hadn't dealt with was the adversity on the field, right? I had overcome these things off the field, but never really processed and grieved in a healthy way and found ways to cope throughout my career with the stuff that I was dealing with, but really did a good job of suppressing that and just focusing on baseball. And as the middle of my career hit, it's well documented. My time in Toronto was a lot of up and down and really just defined my career. That first time I got sent down, that really shattered my view of reality and what my ego had projected as far as my story was going to be. Right, played 10 years, 15 years in Toronto, be in the Toronto Hall of Fame. All the things that your ego starts to project as far as accomplishments and achievements, thinking you have the game or life figured out. And I was quickly humbled. And after that experience of getting sent down, it really shattered, just like I mentioned, my view on what things were and what my value was, and started to question things I'd never questioned going through this process of being drafted. So I was aware that I had some different personality characteristics based off of what I've experienced. But as I said, so many people around me just kept putting me up on that pedestal. And I think for good reason. They were trying to help me get to where I wanted to go in my life. But I never really had that chance to take a step back and evaluate it and process it and go through my own therapeutic experience, which I started later in my career. Really, the last season is when I started working with Seth Taylor, who's my now partner in 3 Athletics, and Seth's a therapeutic life coach. And I had worked with sports psychologists and a lot of great resources through the Blue Jays, the Pirates, the Orioles, and all the other organizations I was with, but really not getting to the depth, the root of the emotional triggers, we'll call them, the experiences that started to pop up, and I couldn't figure out why I couldn't get out of my own head. It'd take weeks or months at a time. And I talk about being a streaky player. I mean, I could be the best hitter in any league I was in for 2 or 3 weeks. And then whether it was imposter syndrome or other things that were starting to trickle into my mindset, it was very difficult for me to just find that consistency. And I think at the end of my career, when I went through this process with Seth and realized how much of my childhood experiences I was carrying with me, it kind of led to the conversation of what complex PTSD is, because it's a relatively new thing, right, in the world of medical diagnosis. Also been involved in marriage counseling for the last 5 or 6 years with my wife, and kind of got the cross from my marriage counselor and Seth being like, yeah, man, there's a little bit more to this than just you went through some things. And again, as I've unpacked what PTSD means, I mentioned in one of my Twitter posts, I never looked at myself as somebody who had experienced trauma. Trauma is a tough word for a lot of people to just
Sure.
take in and understand what it really means. And it's just experiences, right, that lead to reactions later in life. And as I started to dive deeper into that and do more of the work of trying to unpack what it was making me react in situations, whether it was how I am as a husband, how I am as a father, how I was as a leader in the clubhouse. All these different things started to kind of come to fruition, and realizing there was a lot of work that I needed to do, and still a lot of work that I need to do on a regular basis, just to maintain this perspective and also just have a good upbeat outlook on how I can use my story and my experiences to have a positive impact on the next generation of players.
Yeah, that's a lot to deal with as a young person, I can imagine, and going through that. And I was going to ask, it was good to hear that there were some resources. I was going to ask what kind of resources were available to you from the Blue Jays and other teams. So it sounds like they had some sort of support, but it really was just scratching the surface.
Yeah, I think in my early years at Toronto, we had pretty veteran clubhouse, a lot of old school guys, right? And you think about how generations have evolved over the last 50 years. They had experienced a lot of things earlier in their career that veterans were really hard on guys, and I connected with a lot of these guys: Vernon, Doc, BJ Ryan, great veteran guys, Scott Rowland, Kevin Millar, all tremendous human beings, and treated me really well. But there's always the stigma, right, about working with the Blue Jays EAP staff, and the head doctor's in town. And again, that's just the way the culture was at that time. And being in baseball for another 12 years, I think after that time, I got to see that evolution from an organizational approach, as well as just the whole culture of the clubhouse, understanding that we're all kind of struggling in some way, and finding help is really the first step of showing strength. And I think once that started to kind of flip, it was great to see how each organization that I was involved with really tried to provide those resources and build out the mental skills and the different departments that they have to help guys achieve peak performance. But I think it's something I always highlight is the focus is so much on player development and not on human development. And I think at the youth level, that's where 3 Athletics really looks to provide resources, products, and services to parents, coaches, and players to help them understand what kids are actually experiencing at these different developmental stages, and how the pressure and competition of youth sports can create the experience that we're not trying to provide for kids, right? We want to teach them how to be disciplined. We want to teach them how to have grit, all these things that are great about sports. But when it starts happening at 7, 8, 9 years old, and these kids get into 12, 13, 14, then they're either burnout, they're injured, they don't like baseball. There's a strain in the relationship between parents and child, and it just leads to an unhealthy culture for kids to participate in youth sports. And that's not every kid's experience, right? But there's a lot of that takes place. And having been involved in it now as a father and having 3 kids kind of up and coming in this system, it's something I'm doing as much for myself as I am for everybody else, because I need to be held accountable. I need to continue to educate myself on how I can be a better father, right? And know when being a dad is most important to my kids and not being the coach. And I think that's something that every parent can relate to, even if you've never played baseball. We all want to help our kids understand and grow from positive and negative experiences, but more often than not, they just need mom or dad. They don't need that coach. And I think that's a hard line for us to.
I would agree, and that's part of kind of why I started this because, I coached my son for a while from the time he started in t-ball up till about he was maybe 12 years old, and decided I'd take a step back. And I watched a video that you had posted on Instagram, and you were talking about, here we are, I'm watching the soccer game, and these parents are yelling at people, and there's all these things going on, and we're thinking, well, I'm glad we're not as bad as those parents.
Hmm.
And so it was interesting. I took this break for a couple of years of not coaching and just sitting in a lawn chair, eating some seeds, watching the game. And I'd see a coach do something and I'd go, oh, I used to do that.
Yeah.
Oh, or something else. And it was an unbelievable mirror
Yeah.
for me. And then when I got back, I coached him for one more year. It was a different situation. Some people had asked me to coach. I just came on the staff, and I just recognized that I was a totally different individual in how I behaved,
Yep.
because I couldn't believe, as it was mirrored back to me when I was just sitting there, I was like going, that's just not a good look when you're just sitting there being a fan. You're like going, hey, you can't be having that. So let's talk about that concept of identity formation, and how do you suggest it is something that I've talked about in previous episodes. I see things where kids get involved in a game, they play it for fun, then they get really good at it, and then they kind of get thrust into this world that they're not really ready for. And I love the way you and Seth kind of tackle it from a parent perspective, and we can talk a little bit about the book Hero as well. But how do you suggest parents prioritize that child development over player development? Because I see it all the time in the elite sports, or if you want to put air quotes elite. um, there's push, 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 and it's 24/7, 12 months a year. And do they get chances to be kids?
Yeah, I think as you mentioned, it's gotten younger, right? And when we were coming through, 13, 14 is about the time we started doing travel club baseball, and started to get kind of more serious as far as the group of kids that continue to move forward in that organization. I think for any parent, though, in terms of where you're starting and where you're at, is understanding most of us operate from a place of what our past experiences are in sports. And that's one of the first things we dive into in that parent guidebook Hero is what are your top 5 memories of playing sports, right? We can all remember something our mom did or something our dad did, maybe a coach, this, that, whatever, and not really realizing those things are stuck in our subconscious mind. If we never bring those to the conscious mind, we're just going to operate from this place of reactionary type of parenting and or coaching without really looking at it and saying, okay, is this the best way to do it? Right. And then I think to build off of that is then how do you have these conversations with your child? What kind of questions do you ask them as far as what do they love the most? What do they hate the most? What do you love about going to the field? What are the conversations in the car or after the game that I bring up that you don't like? And I think that's a huge one for parents, right? Because it's so difficult to watch your kid go through a tough experience and not want to just help them understand what they did wrong, when a lot of times in that moment what they need is just mom or dad, right? And you'll hear me say this constantly, but it's very difficult for us as parents not to overparent or overcoach our kids. And I think as the culture of mental health and parenting is starting to evolve, we're starting to become more aware of these things that we've done, that our parents did, that I think they were doing because they thought it was the best way to do it, right? And most parents are out there trying to do the best they can with the information they have. But understanding 0 to 10, 11, 12 years old is a very fragile time for your child in terms of who they are and what makes them valuable. They're looking to mom and dad constantly for that type of reaffirmation of yes, I'm safe and yes, I'm loved. And I think when you put your kids in this atmosphere of elite competitive sports in those developmental years, you're putting them out there with that risk and without some of the deeper understandings of how that can affect them into their teenage and into their adult years. And I think as I've gone through this kind of on the back end of my career and kind of unpacking how things were early in my career, I had a lot of teammates, right, that I played with from 9 years old till we were 18, where we won the Little League championship at Washington State when we were 9 years old. And then we won the state championship for 4A baseball in Washington State. And we're one of the best teams in the history of Washington State baseball. We have a number of guys, right, that went through this that didn't even play professionally or Division One. Maybe they got to JUCO, whatever it was, but so much of their identity, their self-worth, right, was derived from their performance on the field and all these accolades and achievements that we had accomplished in our youth baseball careers, that when those accomplishments stopped coming, right, like when I got sent down from the big leagues, it was like this huge shock of like, oh man, am I really as good as I thought I was? Do people love me even though I'm in AAA? And that's just where the brain goes, especially when we've been kind of wired to receive that love through the sport that we play. So again, reaffirming your child is always safe and they're always loved is kind of step number one for parents. No matter if they make 3 errors or they throw 7 innings and no hits and hit 2 home runs, like there's all different kinds of experiences your kids are going to go through. If we can show up with that same presence and that same energy of that we love you no matter what, and we are just proud to watch you work and watch you play, it makes it easier for the kids to go out there and be free and just play the game. And then being mindful, right, of the risks and the rewards of playing these travel sports and committing to something at a year-long level is very difficult for me to comprehend as a dad with 3 kids. I don't look at my kids and say, okay, well, at 9 years old, this kid has got to start here and he's got to go through this whole process. And I think because I've gone through it, I have a little bit different perspective. But where the culture has shifted, right, is we have all these organizations that I think under the surface, a lot of them had good intentions, but there's always this pressure to do more. And so much of it is doing less. And it's quality over quantity and understanding, especially 0 to 9, 0 to 10, how much time are you spending with your kid at a park, in the backyard, in the front yard, whatever your setup is, to be able to get out there and just play, not have a bunch of structure and a bunch of rules, but just let kids do what they're designed to do at this stage, is just play these games, experiment with different styles. And I think it's hard for us, even me at times, where I want to put structure and rules and talk about outs and strikes, and that's all going to come, right? And we want to force that on kids too young. That immediately makes them feel like, okay, if I don't do this right, then I'm going to lose love. And that's what the way a kid at that age really looks at these experiences as. If I don't do it right, I'm not going to be loved the same as if I go out there and I do it and I check all these boxes. So understanding how fragile that first developmental stage is, and then being able to get into these teenage years going into high school where your kid's the one that's driving that bus in terms of, hey, I want to play year-round hockey, or I want to play year-round baseball, or whatever it may be. Understanding, okay, there's a point in time where we start to enter that space, as long as our kid's driving the bus and not the parent that has to be like, hey, we're going to do this and you got to show up and you got to wake up and do it. Like, I didn't have parents that needed to do that, right? And I think that's
Right.
ultimately what led to my success as a baseball player. Is I was willing to work harder than every kid in my community, probably in the state and maybe even the country. I'll say that with a lot of confidence, because I just loved to do it. And I figured out at a young age, if I was willing to do the extra work outside of the team practices and just grind, it's what made me a great baseball player. And I lost kind of track of that as my identity as the grinder who played baseball. I became the baseball player who was a grinder. And it was like just this tough thing for me to really differentiate in my teenage and adult years, because so much love had been received through my achievements on the field.
Right. Where'd you get the nickname Lunchbox? What's that come
Lunchbox
from?
was freshman year of high school. Same time all this was going on. I was 6 foot 225 pounds, playing middle linebacker for the varsity football team, which had never happened before. A freshman playing varsity, let alone playing middle linebacker. And because I was built pretty similar to the way I am now, I could eat, right? So the boys took me out for Taco Bell one night and I crushed $35. This is pre-inflation, right? 25 years ago, and put down $35 worth of Taco Bell, and they looked at me, they're like, all right, you're the lunchbox. And it was something, as I got into professional baseball, the world of social media, which I got caught up in at various times in my career, I wanted to keep it lighter. I wanted to keep it more focused on food, on cooking. And ultimately I started Twitter so that I could get free meals, which ended up being a good idea. But as we talked about in other areas, like social media is a double-edged sword. And I try to keep it as
It
light as I
is.
could.
It is. I know lots of kids that have kind of gone through junior hockey and are now pros, and they talk about how certain times of the year they just turn it off, delete it off their phones, so because you get obsessed on seeing what's going on and what everybody's saying about you, and that can definitely lead to a downward spiral. That's for sure.
Yeah,
So
there's no shortage of dopamine, right? When you open your phone, and we as adults experience this on a daily basis too.
100.
But it's tough, and that's what I talk about. Is like, it's easy to open Twitter when you go 3 for 4 and everybody thinks you're the man, but when you're 2 for 20 or whatever the slump is, and you open that thing up and you just got all the people that feel the need to go onto social media and bash players, it's like that's the cautionary tale for every athlete, is understanding you got to ride the good with the bad and figure out how to create your boundaries and stick to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if how I would be able to show up on a daily basis with, the whole world critiquing my performance. I think about right now in this cycle, George Springer is a bit of a whipping boy here in Toronto, and he's an exceptional baseball player and has a great pedigree. And I can only imagine how difficult it is for him kind of going through this period right now where he was a darling, 12 months ago, and now everybody's like, oh, and that's great. You got an opinion. It is a hell of a hard game. And
Well, yeah, and I think what we're talking about is a professional, right? And he's still human, still experiencing this. It's not easy, but he's getting paid a lot of money, and it kind of comes with the territory. Now, let's back this up to high school. How many kids are posting their highlight videos and receiving love from all their teammates, whether it's their summer ball or their high school teammates? And I have family that's kind of going through this right now, where I try and caution them to understand that the less you do on there, the better off you're going to be, especially if you don't know how to create those boundaries, because you're not at a stage where this is something you're getting paid to do. And really, you should open yourself up to a bunch of other people's opinions that, again, have no real weight on what your future can be. But if you allow those things to start to come into your conscious thoughts and your subconscious mind, it's going to create more problems down the road than you realize.
yeah, I can only imagine. So here's a very broad question. Why are youth sports so toxic?
Because everything has shifted to such a young age and so much pressure is being put on kids by parents who feel so much pressure to keep up with the normalized experience of starting your kid young, becoming more elite or more professional, traveling, spending more money. I mean, the amount of money that parents spend in any sport, we could pick hockey, I'm sure is even worse because you got all the skates and the pads and the gear. But I mean, with baseball, there's $400 bats. We got $300 gloves. We got all the swag that the kids are rocking now, which is great. But it's like parents are invested, right? And there's not only a financial investment, there's an emotional attachment, right? It's the thing you love the most. You want to see them have any and all opportunity to be successful in life. And I think the way it's been designed, the way it's evolved over the last 10, 15, 20 years has really preyed on the parents to feel this pressure, right? That the club official is telling you, well, if little Johnny or little Susie isn't playing year-round soccer or hockey by 9 years old, they're never going to play Division One. You're like, well, I think my kid likes soccer enough, so I got to just go down this path without parents really putting any time or effort into educating themselves on what they're bringing to the table, right? And that's where we see a huge need with 3Athletics. If we can spend thousands, up to hundreds of thousands of dollars, right, for some parents that pay for this from 8 years old till 18, how many of those kids are going to get a scholarship? How many of those parents are looking at their kids as an investment, right? Because this is a lot from a time and a financial standpoint. So it's a very difficult line for parents to walk. And then you have the clubs who feel the pressure to go out and provide more based off of their organizational structure than the other organization. So it's just kind of this race of everybody trying to keep up with each other. And as I entered the space a few years ago with a company that I was involved in, I quickly realized that this thing had gone past where I was going to be able to make an impact at the stage or the level I was doing it, and I just saw the opportunity for not only Seth's book Hero that he wrote 4 or 5 years ago, so we purchased the IP of that and then put it into our company, and now we have multiple sports for it because I just realized, like, as myself, as a parent, I played at the highest level of baseball, right? I played Major League Baseball for as long as I did, but I still didn't understand where my child was at in this process, especially that, my oldest is 7.5 years old. We're not even we're starting to get calls for 8U travel baseball, right? At this point, it's like, okay, guys, what are we really trying to accomplish here? Is it for my son to be able to play an extra 20 or 30 games with his buddies that aren't in the same little league district? Then okay, we can have that conversation. But if you're coming to me talking about trophies that you're winning and the tournaments that you're going to and all the money we're going to spend to have all these great experiences, like, there is some truth to that. But at what age is this really appropriate? And what age are we doing this to give our kids the best opportunities to love the sport that they play when they're 16, 17, 18 years old versus putting all this pressure on them at such a young age to where they're 12, 13, 14. They're like, I don't want to do this anymore. It's too intense. Mom and dad are too intense about this. The coaches are too intense. And I just don't believe that I'm that good.
Yeah, here in Canada, the travel ball thing is not as prevalent, but it is to a certain extent. There's a lot of there's not a lot of little league. There is some, but it's sporadic. That's probably why you don't see Canada in the Little League World Series doing too well every year. It's
Yeah.
usually BC. BC's big in Little League. In this Ontario, there's not too many teams, but it's mostly like club baseball. So it's local based on where you live, kind of like maybe what Legion would have been or something like that.
Yep.
So it starts, travel, if you want to call it travel ball or pay to play or whatever it is, these private programs starts around 14U, which
Yeah.
probably
I
isn't
think,
bad.
yeah.
That's reasonable. They just the one league, the Canadian Premier Baseball League, just reached down and said we're going 13U this year because parents want best on best competition. And I laugh because the Ontario Baseball Association at 13U, that's your year that if you win, you can represent your province, your state for Americans, nationally and play for national championship. So
Yep.
do you want best on best if you're the parent, or do you want your kid to if he's playing on a good team, maybe has a chance of winning? So I find it really odd for them to reach down that low. I mean, obviously I know why. You need to feed the beast and you want more people in it. And that's why you have 8U, 9U, stuff like that in the US. But
Yeah.
years ago with one of those teams, they were trying to get down as low as 10U, and I was approached about me coaching a team and my kid being on a team, and I went to somebody that I know who'd been through this and had played Division 1 baseball, and I said, "What do you think about this?" And he goes, "Let him be a kid."
Yeah.
And it was like the best advice I ever got, because I just said, "Okay, yeah, that makes sense." Like they go, "There's plenty of time for pressure," and I
Yeah.
went, "Yeah, okay." But for whatever reason, at that point, he was pretty good at baseball, and I thought, well, geez, if this is where it's going, it's so easy to get sucked in, that this is the right thing to do, and I really treasure that advice I got, because it allowed him to just kind of play the game and have fun.
Yeah, which every parent is going through that at some point in their kids' childhood sports experience is like, okay, when do we turn up the intensity? When do we get them to the next level? How do we go about this? And I think if you ask the local club directors, and I can't speak for your guys' area, but I can speak around here, there's just a lot of dads that feel like if their kid's not playing 8, 9, or 10U travel ball outside of Little League, and again, there's some reasons to do it, right? If your kids don't live in the same district as their friends playing there's reasons why it makes sense. But I think as a whole, it's gotten so focused on best competition. It's gotten focused on winning tournaments, right? I won my first state championship at 9 years old playing Little League baseball, because when you win your district, you go and represent your district at state. We did it at 9, we did it at 11, we took second, we were 10, we took second, we were 12. We won multiple national championships from 13 to 18, and then we capped it off with a state championship. So I checked all the achievement boxes, right? But at the same time, as I'm going back through this with my kids, I'm like, okay, I love Little League, but I understand not every Little League situation is set up the same as what I grew up with. And being back involved with the same league, I see the changes that have taken place over the last 25, 30 years since I was in it. And you realize things have shifted, and that's okay. But for us as the adults that are in charge of our children's futures and their development, and the people who are running these organizations, I think there's a much higher level conversation that needs to be taking place, and really understanding what are the risks and the rewards to doing these things at different stages of the developmental process, and understanding if you have an organization who has the right focus, right? And that's something that 3A, we want to work with, as many organizations as we can to help educate the leadership teams, the coaches, the parents, and the players to understand what is this really all about, right? And if we're obsessed with winning the perfect game tournament in Brewster, Washington, for example, I don't even know if there's a tournament there, right? But there's all these tournaments, and we can get these banners and we can get these trophies and these really cool rings that we can wear around. It's like, what are we really focusing on here? Is it winning and losing, or is it about giving our kids an opportunity to go out and experience the game and be kids, right? And then when we get to the stage where there's a collective group of energy within the core group of kids that hopefully your kid gets to play with, a good group of friends throughout this process, I think those are the things that we overlook, right? Is like, we want to put them on the best team. Well, what if 5 of their best buddies aren't at that stage, and your son wants to play with them instead of go and play with the better team? And maybe the better team, the coach is a little bit more intense, and the coach's intensity is what turns your kid off from the sport, right? And I've experienced that even with my 7-year-old son, where it's like, okay, I have to have the awareness as a parent to say, okay, how much of this can I ask my son about, and what kind of response am I going to get? The 7.5-year-old kid doesn't understand everything that's going on, but I've gotten really good feedback from my 7-year-old. It's like, I never would have thought of it that way. And I'm so glad that I was able to ask you these questions so that I could understand how you really feel about this, so that I can protect you through this process and not feel like we have to just go and do something because somebody else is doing it.
Yeah, no, it's great advice. It really is. And I think, I wish some of this stuff that I'm reading now I knew like 10 years ago, but it's never too late. I recently had a conversation with my son and said, "Hey, I want you to know that whatever you do in baseball has nothing to do with how we feel about you as a person and how we care about you, right? It just was, I don't know, it just something that struck me that needed to be said because I really didn't want him to get sucked into the trap that he's just chasing something for us.
Yeah,
Because,
I think a lot of kids are doing that, right? And a lot of parents, and credit to you. We're all at different stages. I'm in the beginning stage of this as a parent. I've gone through it as a player. There's parents that are well removed. One of our partners, the third partner at Three Athletics, is Mike Neely. Mike had 4 kids, 3 of them that were playing sports, 2 of them that were pretty intense. One of them that I actually trained with and worked out with for years as he was at Washington State and then played for a handful of years in the minor leagues. And Mike's whole motivation in this is understanding, number one, all the mistakes that he made with his first 3 kids, that he started to do better with his fourth kid. And now, as we're engaged in these conversations, at some point, we're getting Mike on the content side of things to be able to talk about this as a parent who actually achieved this dream. And my kid played Division 1, and then he went on and got drafted. What are the realities financially? What are the realities emotionally? What are the realities? How did he, at one point, luckily his youngest son just told him, shut up, like, don't talk, like, when I'm on the field, don't talk to me. And he respected that, but he'll tell you, and again, it's being able to draw. It's not about shame and blame and all these things that we want to do as a culture to make people feel bad. It's like, whether your kid is 16 or your kid is 36, I think this resonates with a lot of parents. And that's the energy that I feel when I have these conversations with people, whether it's my 85-year-old great uncle or, somebody like yourself, right? Where you're in a little bit different stage of parenting, but we can all recognize as parents, there's better ways to do things. We're not perfect. I'm not perfect. Seth's not perfect. Mike's not perfect, right? But the whole goal here is to raise the awareness and have the deeper conversations and help educate players, parents, and coaches as to what are we missing, what are we focused on, and why are these things why are they counterproductive?
yeah, I mean, and as a firstborn kid, I can certainly attest to experimental child. And it gets, they get better as they go, or maybe they get less harsh on the younger ones. At least that's what us older ones always think. But I
Yeah.
know a collective experience is a definitely a good thing, and trying to be a little bit more aware of what we're doing. So I want to shift gears a little bit. I really love this piece that you guys created, the Good to Great Journal. I've been talking to different people, and they're talking about the benefit. As a kid, hey, you should journal, and that's easy to say. Hey,
Yeah.
just
What does
journal.
that mean?
Oh yeah, what does that mean? Like, what do you
Yeah.
write down? My son got a journal, and he's written like 2 or 3 things or whatever. It's
Yeah.
funny, right? And it's like no guidance. So they're about to go away at 3 weeks, and so after kind of looking through some of this stuff, I bought the journal and I kind of reviewing it, and I think it's great. Maybe you can explain it a little bit, but I love that it has a lot of prompts
Yeah, so
to.
it's there's a 6 month build out, right? And each month has a monthly teaching. So month one, we focus on identity, which we feel is the foundation of this experience for kids and humans outside of sports, right? Who am I? What makes me valuable? How do I define myself? Then we get into the conscious and subconscious mind, which I talked about before. What are the thoughts you're aware of? What are the thoughts that you're not aware of that are actually driving your responses and the way that we react and act in life? The third month is focused on mindset. We talk about the lion mindset, which is obviously the hunter, somebody who's out there playing the game free and hungry. And then the antelope, which is when we're scared, right? And we all experience these, even in the major league level. You see guys, you mentioned George Springer and other guys, they have these moments too, right? But becoming more aware of these moments and learning how to work through them and reframe them, I think is a huge step in part of our process that we really try and hammer home into this journal. Is the week one is about creating self-awareness, and then we give them 3 more weeks to really kind of evolve and develop and figure out where we are missing the opportunities to get better because our mind or because something's happening, right? So that leads us into, I think, number 4 is triggers. Yep. Which, again, what is a trigger? It's a response to something based off of something else that's happened to you. And a lot of times the experiences I had as a player, a coach at the professional level would tell me something about my swing, and that would trigger an emotional response. My cheeks would get red. Chad Mottola, former Blue Jays hitting coach, noticed that, and he was one of the most in tune coaches I have. He's like, "Wow, your cheeks are getting red. You don't like what I just said." And I'm like, we had a great personal and professional relationship, so I was able to work through it with him. But that wasn't something. I mean, I talked to my high school football coach the other day. He's like, "You're the most stubborn guy I know," and I was like, "Okay, that makes sense," and I'll believe that. But not being aware of those things as a player, right, led to a lot of struggles. Whether it was with coaching staff, Cito Gasson, that one was a well documented experience for me, where Cito was trying to help me. It was just the way he approached certain things just triggered a response in me where it's like, I don't want to hear anything this guy has to say. And he's got all the right and the experience and the accolades to be a great coach, and he was a great coach. But at this stage of my experience, I was not ready for the way he was trying to coach me. Luckily, I've had a chance to give him a big hug and just say thank you and apologize, because again, I knew what he was trying to do. I just wasn't able to receive that information. But again, we talk about old school versus new school, right? I was kind of stuck in the middle of all this, where I wasn't old school. I was grinder. I get after it, but at the same time, I had a lot of this emotional stuff, right? Which I later found out was diagnosed as complex PTSD. So it's a little bit more complex, no pun intended. But as I started to become more aware of my triggers, okay, now I know as a parent, as a husband, the things that I got to continue to focus on to be a better version of myself, to show up better for my kids, show up better for my wife. And as a player, how do you show up better for your teammates? How do you show up better for your parents? How do you show up better than your coaches? So that's month 4's triggers. Month 5 is your parent relationship, right? So taking kids through the positive and negative experiences that they've had with their parents in sports, which is important for us to all get out on paper. And then being able to lead them through an experience of saying, okay, what are the things that could happen this week that mom or dad are going to say? How can you be more prepared in that moment, not to have the emotional reaction, but to actually speak your truth? And I think that's one of the biggest things I've learned in therapy is like, I can logic and reason for days like a lawyer, but I never actually tell people how I feel, right? And that's ultimately when you're vulnerable with somebody and you connect with them and you're able to tell them, hey, this is how I really feel. A lot of times that's going to be very well received, right? Versus the emotional reaction of why did you say that, or the cheeks get red and just everything shuts down. So your parent relationship, which I think we highlight a lot in the hero book for parents to kind of look at the players and the coaches and the team and what they're dealing with. But this is a chance for the player to actually sit there and say, okay, how can mom and dad and improve our relationship moving forward and still maintain gratitude throughout this whole process. And then the last one is your coach. Same thing I alluded to earlier, right? There's coaches that your greatest coach of all time, your least favorite coach of all time. Why? Start to get kids more aware of what they like, what they don't like, right? And then as they reach these different levels and they have different coaches, they understand how they operate better, they can communicate, which I think is ultimately our goal for as parents is to really teach our kids to have that self-awareness and learn how to navigate the world with the tools and the skills that they have and help them grow and evolve by creating that awareness and then giving them tools like this journal to help them really think through it and start to process it in a different way instead of just shoving it all down. And then, the big eruption happens, whether it's like quit baseball or I hate you, mom, I hate you, dad, I hate, all these things that come out as the emotional response without understanding all the underlying causes for these reactions.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I think I really liked it. It's really well laid out, and for those who are listening, the links will be in the show notes to both Hero and the Good to Great Journal for you to check them out and give them a read. I mean, one of the interesting things too, I saw Andrew McCutcheon having read the book and saying, "Geez, there was a lot of me work. It
Yep.
was all about, it was about the
Yeah,
parent relationship and how you were doing it." So I think that's great too, because, hopefully that can stem some of the toxicity. And I think sometimes, for us as parents, it's well meaning, but not always well received, I guess is probably the best way to put it. Right. So,
absolutely. And again, it's not about shame and blame. That's too easy. We can sit there and debate politics and all the other things and be angry at each other. But from parenting standpoint, like let's all pull on the rope in the same direction. Understand we come from different experiences, different backgrounds, different religions, different cultures. Like there's a lot of difference floating around in the world that we live in. But as parents, our whole goal is to give our kids a better opportunity than what we had. And that doesn't mean we want to raise sunflowers, so we're just going to go out and live off the trust fund and have no resistance in life. We want to traumatize our kids properly, right? I don't know if that's a proper thing to say, but at the end of the day, we want to know how to play the game of parenting better. And I think that's something that's lacked in the world of youth sports, and that's led to kind of the cultural shift that we've seen over the last 15, 20 years, where you got more kids with anxiety, you got more kids that are getting burnt out. We got more injuries because of more overuse, and it's just more, 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 more. It's like, let's just pull back for a second, do some self work as the adults that are supposed to be modeling the behavior for our children, for them to actually learn by watching us instead of just all the time.
and what did my dad say? Children are supposed to be seen and not heard, something like
Yep.
that. There you
Yep.
go.
I heard that a few
Yeah,
times too from my
there you
grandpa.
go. Old school.
Yep.
So I like to end with, I love the discussion, could go on for hours, but I like to end with a few rapid fire questions. So you can choose your own, but what is one book you would recommend everyone reads?
I mean, let's go hero, and then we can shift to a book called Mindset, which there's better versions that have come out since. But anything that helps you invest in yourself as a parent, the same way you want to invest in your child's development, let's become better parents.
Oh, that's great. It's good advice. What's one thing a listener can do right now, whether it's a kid or a parent, to kind of make a change in their mindset?
Start creating more self-awareness, and that's what hero is designed to do, is help parents understand what we're bringing into this relationship, and then change the narrative of the conversations that you have with your kids so that you can meet them where they're at instead of speaking to them from here to here. Right, we have to be able to get on their level to connect with them in a way. It doesn't mean the response is always going to be what we want it to be, but we got to be able to look in the mirror and say the things that we actually want to see happen.
Okay, so that's great. Piece of advice you'd pass along to teenage you?
Your self-worth and the love that you receive is far greater than just being a baseball player.
Advice. And the best piece of advice you've ever received, and who gave it to you?
I mean, this isn't as deep, but Scott Rowland on my major league debut, and I gave this advice to several other players that I had a chance to share that experience with, was just enjoy every single moment of it because you only get one. No matter what you do, live every moment of that with pure joy because all the hard work has led you to this point and nobody can take that away from you.
Yeah, I can only imagine that's an emotional experience. I mean, any of us who are into sports, you listen to certain things and you watch, and as an example, a player on TV, it's his major league debut and he hits a home run in his first at bat. And you
Yep.
see his parents in the stands going bananas. And I get like emotional because I can only imagine the effort, the hours, because I know to an extent, but I don't truly know, but what everybody went through to get to that moment and
Yep.
how amazing it must be. So yeah, enjoy.
Yeah.
I think it's good advice for anything. Enjoy the moments. Yeah, absolutely. So if you could choose one guest to be on this show, who would you suggest?
I think Russell Martin, recent Canadian Baseball Hall of Famer, another guy who read Hero and had some interesting perspective on how it kind of prepares you for the test, even if you're not at this stage with your kid, gives you kind of some forward thinking. But Russ was an incredible leader, an incredible teammate. I know he had peaks and valleys in his career in all those departments, right? Performance across the board. But I mean, to have the career that he had, the type of leadership that I was able to experience with him in Pittsburgh, and just a guy that I love and respect. And luckily got to go golf with him at Banded Dunes, and he got to see my first hole in one. So pretty
Oh,
special guy
awesome.
for me.
Still don't have a hole in one. You lucky guy.
Yeah, I was very lucky. Not a good golfer, and I got it done.
Yeah, me as well. I've been close, but I've seen lots of other people get them, but not me. It is one of those holy grails of golf for sure.
Yeah.
Travis, I want to thank you for the time. It was everything that I hoped it would be. I hope it was great for you. For those out there, thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe to wherever you find your podcasts.